Hello gardeners, welcome to In the Garden. Today in the garden we're going to talk about some maintenance things. One of them being plants that need dividing, and this is a great time of year for dividing your iris. You want to give them about 4 to 6 weeks after bloom, so generally, depending on the year, that's about mid-July through mid to late August. You want to give them at least a good month after you've transplanted before you've got a hard frost, because you want those roots to settle in. So we're going to start out by digging a clump of iris. I'm going to glove up here because it's always a good idea to wear gloves when you're digging in the dirt. I've got no open-toed shoes when I'm using sharp digging implements, so I'm going to grab my fork and we're going to head over to the bed where I'm going to dig a clump. This bed's a little overgrown, needs some renovation, but I kind of determined earlier, I tagged this one that this one is a double, and since I have, want to keep space open, I'm going to take this clump out. So we're going to get in here and get back from the iris a little bit and just start wiggling. I like to use a fork for most of my things when I'm digging. It kind of lifts the roots out of the ground instead of cutting them. So I just kind of start with a little prying here. You can hear it coming loose. I'm going to shake off dirt. And one more chunk to go. Maybe. This one does not want to come loose. There we go. As you can see, some of these are coming apart already, even as I'm shaking off the dirt, so that makes things a little easier. They kind of tend to grow over themselves. This clump has been in the ground probably about 4 to 5 years. And that's about the normal time usually when you need to divide them. It depends somewhat on how close together they were planted to begin with. But, and some iris are just very vigorous growers, so. Okay, we're going to work our way out of the bed here and take this back over to the table I have set up so we can show you how to wash them and cut them apart. I like to wash most plants off when I'm dividing so I can see just what I'm getting here. It's kind of a fun thing to do if you have a hot day. You get to stay cool while you're working. Okay, now we have a better look at what we're dealing with here. I'm going to kind of tip this over this. And you can use a knife, or I prefer to use a pruners. I'm kind of dangerous with a knife, so I usually go with the pruners. Now just to show you, I'm going to do some cutting here. Generally when you do this, you're going to cut down the leaves. Couple of reasons. When you transplant, it's not as much for the roots to try to support while they're getting reestablished. And another one is if you leave this tall leaf on, when it's if you're in a windy location or you get a good wind and the roots aren't established yet, it can rock them right out of the ground. Clear off some of this dead stuff. And I'm just going to kind of start clipping apart a little. Okay, if you can see This part, here's an old bloom stalk right here. This part is not going to bloom again. It's done. So I sometimes like to leave them a little bit bigger and leave a double fan. So I'm just going to clean this up and clip this off way down. Pull this off. And clean that up a bit. Toss it in my little bucket. That one's ready to go. Just have to let them dry off a little. Okay, this part's really overgrown. See all this? This is no good anymore. So we're going to get rid of that. In this case, just the way it's coming apart, it's going to be some singles. And that's okay. It might just take them a little longer to rebloom, but they'll grow. Okay, this one, when I'm looking at it, I'm going, that's the only good part. I'm just gonna compost. Well, I won't put it in the compost. That'll go in my garbage because you never know with iris. You don't want to spread any diseases. I'm gonna clip it down a little further. Clean that up. Once I get the leaves out of the way, I can see what I'm doing a little better. If you want to be fancy and take the time, you can do a nice angled cut, but the plant really isn't going to care. Okay, this one, since they're kind of small, I'm just going to leave this one as a triple, but I'm going to cut off a little bit more of this old bulb. Some of these old roots aren't going to do anything either, so we'll take out a couple of those. Leave as many of the nice white, new, vigorous roots as possible. So, and there you have it. Now, I like to let them dry a little bit before I replant. I'll let that cut end callus over and heal over a little bit. I'm going to clean off my pruners. Always a good idea anyway when you move between plants, because you don't want to spread any diseases that might be there. And if you notice when I'm cutting, I'm using a bypass pruners. It's called that because the blades go past each other, kind of like a scissors. And that's probably your best choice for pruners. The anvil pruners are the ones where the blade comes down on a flat surface, and they tend to crush stems instead of making a clean cut. So that's one of my reasons for using a bypass. Now, through the magic of television, I dug some others last night. This is one called Coal Seams, and we're going to replant these now. I'm going to grab my gloves and my fork, and I only want like 3 of these iris at most. That'll give me a good sized clump in no time. I'm going to head over to this bed where I dug them out last night. I have my bucket of compost here, and iris are not heavy feeders, so you want to go easy on the fertilizer. Generally, I mix in compost. If you want to fertilize them, use a low nitrogen. That's the first number on the bag. You don't want too much nitrogen or you'll get all growth and not much bloom. I'm going to move my name tag for this one. I do have some of my iris tag, not all. Dump out some nice compost. I'm going to work this compost in, just dig it up and mix it in here. A couple more times just to be sure it's mixed. Plant them the way you want them to grow. They're going to grow in the direction of the fan. These are the toes. This is the head, so to speak. and they're going to grow in this direction. So I don't want them to grow that way. I'm going to turn them so they grow back this way. And when you do it, you don't want to cover too much of the rhizome. That can lead to rot, and it's just, they don't bloom as well. I'm just going to work this up. So I'm going to make a space for the roots here. I'm going to leave a mound, a ridge there. Another one there. And one more here. I'm going to set the iris down so that the rhizome is on top of the ridge in the soil and the roots are going down the side. Okay. Do this one and one back here. Get those roots covered up. Make sure that's seated down in there well. When I mentioned fertilizing, you probably don't want to do it right now when you're planting. Wait till next spring. Clean off my fork a little bit here, and then we're going to grab the hose and give them a little drink just to settle them in. Water them pretty well. You want to keep them somewhat moist. Don't water every day. I mean, don't let them get bone dry, but they don't need as much water as some other plants do. We don't want that hard blast on like I had for washing them off, so we'll just change that, and we'll give them a good drink to settle the soil around them. And I don't mulch my iris. You don't want mulch or soil over the tops of those rhizomes. They like to be in the sun. Now I could have planted them in more of a circle if I wanted. It's kind of up to you how you want them to grow. And they may or may not bloom next spring. Bigger ones probably will give me some bloom, but it might take until the second year. And that's how you take care of the iris. Now, a few other things we can be doing around the garden is some deadheading. And when I talk about deadheading, that just means taking off the old blooms. I have some daisies that need some deadheading. On our trip here, we'll notice one of my favorite lilies, Scheherazade, is in full bloom here. This one happens to be Shasta Daisy Becky. And if you look down here, you can see all kinds of new buds already coming. So as long as I keep it deadheaded, okay, you can see here is a bud down here. I'm going to go down to where this connects to the stem. And as I think I mentioned once before, Becky is just a blooming machine. When you're talking about daisies, I know a lot of people have trouble with them not coming back after the winter. They hate winter wet. They do not like to be in a place where ice or water is going to freeze over them. I did lose Becky a couple years ago when we had a lot of rain in the winter. And but usually she comes back, and daisies are kind of not the super hardy here, so they're borderline. So if you get a year with winter wet, you may very well lose your clump and have to start over. But I think for the investment, it's a pretty good return on investment. This one has been here now 3 years, and I think I paid maybe $7 for her. So yeah, you know, you'd hate to lose one, but Just know when you plant a daisy, it's not always super hardy here. We're going to go on and take a look around at a couple of other things. You can see the swamp milkweed is blooming. This light pink one. Oh, there's a monarch coming to visit. This is also the time of the year when the yellow aphids show up. So you might going, oh no, what do I do? Well, pretty simple solution. Usually if there's only a few, I don't worry too much about it. Last night I sprayed some off on a different clump, and I'm just going to go grab my hose and we're going to hit them with a blast of water. We're going to turn this to the same hard blast I used on my washing off the irises. I'm going to turn it on not quite full force, and just another fun one to do on a hot day. It's not going to hurt the plant. There's a few more here. It's easier if you can reach the plant and grab onto the stem as you're doing it, but you can get a fair number off even if you can't. So you might have to do this 2 or 3 days in a row, or check it a couple times a week, depending on how many aphids there were. But, oh, there's one over there I can't quite get to, so we're just gonna blow them off. No insecticidal soap or anything else needed, just a good blast of water. This one is nearly done blooming, but there's a little trick here. If you just snip off under the dried bloom head, most phlox will give you some rebloom in a few weeks. Just clip off under the seed head, and the bloom heads won't be quite as big, but it'll still be some color that'll take you through to fall. Now, some flowers, when you deadhead, you're not going to get rebloom, doesn't matter, but they'll just look neater. And again, deadheading is just removing the dead flowers. Some of you of a certain age might think I'm referring to the group the Grateful Dead. I am not. Some of you might not have any idea who they are, so you'll have to Google them. Sometimes you don't know if a plant's going to rebloom or not. You can't find info, so try it. Just experiment. If you've got one that's now in a couple of weeks, these shoots will start showing, and I'll just keep deadheading as as more finish. And in a couple of weeks, here's some I did a while ago. They're already starting to throw out a couple new little side shoots. And like I said, you won't get the big heads like over here, but you'll get some. And we're going to take a look at this Heliopsis, or false sunflower. I think this one is Prairie Sunset. And a couple reasons for deadheading on this. One, it keeps the self-seeding to a minimum. And on a lot of these, if they self-seed, what you get is not going to be the same as the parent plant. It's going to revert back to one of the parents, whatever it was crossed with. Which in some cases, you might be happy with the seedlings, sometimes not. So, but these can get, they're pretty prolific self-seeders. But if I do a little deadheading on them, these will keep blooming until frost. So you can't complain too much about a flower that starts usually in mid to late June and blooms till frost. I'll take a little self-seeding with that. And again, I'm just reaching down, going down, following down to the base of the stem, wherever it connects onto the main stem. And you don't have to do this every day. I do it usually every couple of weeks. When I get a fair amount of dried looking seed heads or ones that are browning, I'll go through and do a deadheading. I should probably talk a minute about these handy little, they're called fruit thinning snips or fruit shears, needle nose shears. These are the handiest little things you will ever use. And this holster for them, and I do recommend a holster because they are sharp and you don't want to stab yourself. This thing lives on my hip most of the summer, and if I go out without it, I regret it. I use it in the garden when I'm harvesting stuff, cutting the stems of peppers or eggplant, or sometimes even gourds if they're not too big. Pumpkins, I need something a little heavier duty, but this is a great little tool. And I see Thor is coming to join us now. We're going to take just a quick look at some daylilies. Most of the ones, a lot of the ones in this bed are finished. They were earlier. A couple that are just coming into bloom. Some people live head them. They go around at the end of the day and pick off the spent blooms. I usually don't bother, but you can just snap those off. You may have noticed I left this seed pod. That's because this is one that I made across and I want to collect the seeds to grow next. I'll plant the seeds probably in January and set the plants out in the garden in June, and then the next year I'll have bloom usually. So this is a cross of this one plus one called So Beautiful to Me. And it looks like it's going to have a nice seed pod on it. Here's another one to snap off. A couple more seed pods that I've been trying to, and sometimes you get seed pods and sometimes you don't. So some plants are very difficult as far as setting seed, and some do it even when you don't want them to. The Stella d'Oros and some of the rebloomers are notorious for setting hundreds of seed pods. And you really want to snap those off because it's taking energy from the plant. So I usually never do more than 2 or 3 crosses on a plant when I do them. Okay, wandering around, I see there's more deadheading to do over there on the masterwort. Again, deadheading is just snipping off the spent blooms. And if you do it wrong, don't worry. The plant will come back regardless. And like I said, some will rebloom, some won't. I'm going to just kind of, again, follow that stem down. Getting a little bit of rebloom there from some I did earlier. Some of these leaves look pretty funky from the heat earlier, so I'm just going to clip off a few of those and let some nice new growth come from underneath. We're going to talk just a minute about this catmint. I've cut it back once and it rebloomed, and that's probably about as much bloom as I'm going to get out of it. This starts early. So I'm just going to go down just to make things look a little neater and cut it down to a somewhat uniform height. That also lets the daylily here show off a little more. It's, they've done their share for the year. Kept the pollinators happy, and so I think you can see just this little bit I did, how it kind of neatens things up. I think we'll just finish up with a quick tour around the side and see a little bit of what's blooming right now. The hydrangeas are coming into bloom now. This one up here is Pinky Winky. We've got an Annabelle in the back and a couple of little lamb. Daylily, the pink one there, is Janice Brown. That's an oldie, but still a goodie. One of my favorite daylilies up here on the top is Guard Your Heart. These are some later blooming astilbes. These over here, this is one called Delft Lace. And it's one of my favorites. I love the reddish stem. This one is a little behind. It's so you can see the red more. I've got some ligularia there that I'll deadhead. I like to leave the astilbe blooms. Sometimes if I have free time and kind of think about it, I'll grab a can of spray paint and spray some of the brown ones to keep a little color going. It's a little cheater thing, but people kind of go, "You've got astilbe blooming yet?" Sure I do. Here's my latest blooming astilbe. It's actually starting a little early this year. It's about almost a week ahead of normal bloom. This is Pumila. And this one is a ground cover one, so it just kind of continues to spread out. So I'm going to back up a little bit and go to this plant right down here, the Bernera or pig squeak. It has pink flowers in the spring. This one is winter glow, and I would plant this one even if it didn't bloom because the fall color is absolutely gorgeous. You get all kinds of shades of bronze and orange and red, and you can see the leaves are starting to turn a little bit red. We have a white ice ballet, the butterfly, Asclepias tuberosa, swamp milkweed there. And here's another favorite daylily. Smaller bloom, but this is called Lavender Blue Baby, and I just absolutely love the colors on it. And the lavender one behind it is called Sarracenia. You see I have some lilies to deadhead back here. And when I do that, it's mainly because I just don't want them forming seed and taking energy away from the bulb since I'm not breeding them. If I were breeding them, I would, be pollinating them myself and setting seed. So I just clip off that. And it looks a little neater. I'm not putting any energy into seed pods. And I think that just about takes care of today's session of In the Garden. Thanks for tuning in.